ever wonder why so many great initiatives in schools, businesses, and organizations fizzle out? It's not the idea that's the problem, it's the leadership behind it. Now, hear me out. Too often, leaders are pushed to launch new programs or manage big changes without the clarity, tools, or support they need to carry the vision forward. And when that happens, momentum dies, morale drops, and the mission stalls. Well, at Leadership on the Rocks, we believe successful initiatives start with well equipped leaders. Our workshops give your leadership team a practical framework packed with tools for clarity, communication, collaboration, and execution. Here's how it works. 1, we listen to your needs. 2, we customize a high impact leadership workshop just for you. And then 3, you build the kind of leadership culture that gets results and keeps them. Don't let another good idea die on the vine. Empower your leaders to lead with confidence and direction. Book your workshop today at leadershipontherocks.com because when your leaders grow, everything else follows.
With many industries, including the one I served in, as an operations officer, you have to be able to operate with 80% or less of information, which means that at any given time, there's 20% unknown out there. They make decisions with 80% or less information. And that's a challenge. Leaders have to be able to do that.
This is the Leadership on the Rocks podcast, where we equip and empower leaders like you to thrive in and create harmony between your professional and personal lives. I'm your host, Bethany Reese, and in today's episode, we're going to be talking with Jeffrey Sanow about leading with clarity when the pressure is high. Jeffrey Sanow is a highly respected expert in global intelligence, risk management, and strategic leadership with over 35 years of experience across international operations, security, and executive training. As a former senior intelligence officer in the National Clandestine Service of the CIA, Jeffrey played a critical role in high-stakes missions worldwide, focusing on counter-proliferation, embassy security, and intelligence operations. Post-CIA, Jeffrey transitioned into defense contracting, leadership consulting, and corporate training. He has advised elite military units, worked in high-risk international environments, and served as a strategic consultant for businesses aiming to enhance risk management, leadership resilience, and crisis preparedness. Now, as a keynote speaker, leadership coach, and risk consultant, Jeffrey brings advanced CIA-inspired methodologies to corporations, executives, and security professionals worldwide. His unique approach integrates intelligence-based strategies with biblical leadership principles, making his insights both practical and profound. He is also the author of the newly released book, Humint for Humanity. Welcome to the Leadership on the Rocks podcast, Jeffrey. We are so happy to have you.
Thank you very much for this opportunity. I'm delighted to be here.
All right, Jeffrey, whenever I think of CIA, and probably a lot of listeners out there, I think of spies or just really cool stuff, Mission Impossible type stuff. So I got to ask the question. It has nothing to do with probably the rest of it, but how does one even become in the CIA or become a spy? Because that is cool.
So when I retired, I called up my sister, who did not know what I had done for a long time, and said, "Hey, Sherry, I just retired from the CIA. I was an operations officer." And her immediate response was, "You mean like Jason Bourne?" Yes, just like Jason Bourne, they train us to ride motorcycles across rooftops and do all sorts of fun stuff. No, nothing like that whatsoever. That's Hollywood's fantasized version of something else. An aside on Hollywood, anytime you see a CIA person using a cell phone in an office, they're not in the CIA because cell phones are not even permitted in the building.
Wow.
And it's heavily enforced because they can be misused by the bad guys.
Mm-hmm.
At any rate, the CIA, first of all, it is in fact a government bureaucracy. Let's not lose sight of that fact. To become an operations officer, you need a couple of things. One is you need to have at least a college degree. You have to be able to get past a polygraph. What does that mean? You have to be able to go through a very uncomfortable experience and tell a complete stranger every sin that you've committed since the age of 18.
Oh, wow.
I don't know how else to describe it. Because they will frequently ask, "Is there anything else you want to say? Is there anything else you might have done?" wide open questions that unless you can say no with 100% certainty, that needle's going to be doing this.
You know what I'm thinking of? I'm thinking of Chunk in the Goonies, whatever the bad people are like interviewing, and he's just revealing his entire history. I would imagine the experience would be like that.
At the end of the day, these polygraphers, I suspect it applies to many industries where the polygraphers work, um, they've heard it all.
Hmm.
You're not going to, most Americans, let me put it that way, are not going to tell them something new. So, college degree, be honest and be able to get through a polygraph. Um, any kind of foreign language that you can learn, foreign language experience, yeah, they're going to test you. You just can't put on the
Hmm.
application, I speak fluent French. They're going to test you. Um, so you have the foreign language, the foreign experience. At the end of the day, the biggest hurdle is going to be, can you get through a background check, which is going to include the polygraph, security check. Um, and then that's really pretty much it.
Wow.
The working level analyst as well as operations officer, and I was an operations officer, are the best that this country has to offer. So you're going to meet the really, really high quality people. And I can't say that enough. Please don't believe what you see on TV, or even
Or
in
the
the
movies, no Jason Bourne.
no, it's not about Jason Bourne. It's about hard work, showing up every day, reading reports, writing reports. Everything is written. Going to meetings. I mean, we used to joke about going from pointless headquarters meeting to pointless headquarters meeting. Well, they still had to happen. So,
Yeah.
at any rate, that's how you join the agency. You have to have a spirit of adventure. I had a spirit of adventure.
Yeah. Well, thank you
So
so much for sharing that experience. I know that's a question that I've always, been fascinated by because you're right. We see the Jason Bourne movies and, we read headlines and maybe not even the entire articles, and we're piecing together what we think the experience is like in the CIA. But the fact that you talked about all the experiences that you've had of, international, but also meeting after meeting, report after report, I think a lot of people can identify with the meetings and the report piece. So, thinking about all your time in the field, what radically shaped the way that you think about leadership, considering all of your experience in the CIA?
like many large organizations, I experienced good leadership and bad leadership. And I will give you an example of good leadership. I was traveling to a country, and we'll probably talk about it later, in the Middle East, that is significant to our history, our biblical history. I was in Damascus. The Damascus is arguably the second most important city in early Christianity. I double checked that with my pastor before I said it. That's why I can say it. Um, Fascinating city, fascinating people. Not what you would call friendly to the United States.
Mm-hmm.
And I was doing work there, and I came back, and within 2 hours of me returning home, I would receive an email from the chief of station. Because whenever I got home, the first thing I did, send a message that says I'm home. That's just smart. And within 2 hours, I would have a response back from him. Keep in mind that the process that email had to go through to get from me to him and then from him back to me was lengthy.
Mm-hmm.
So it made me feel like he was sitting at his desk waiting for me to send him a note because he knew my schedule. It made me feel like he was concerned for my well-being. Forget the work. He was concerned for my well-being. So as soon as I got home, I would send a note. He'd get one back, or I'd get one back from him rather, that said, "Glad you made it back safely. Look forward to the reports." Just the
Wow.
acknowledgement and the immediacy of him paying attention. He had lots of other things to do. He didn't have to pay attention to me, but he did. And that's how you treat employees. When I went to took my first management job, my new boss said to me, the first thing you need to do is to learn how to communicate with each person. I
Mm-hmm.
had roughly 8 or 10 people working for me. And these are all hard charging type A case officers, but they come from the full spectrum of personalities, cultures, backgrounds, whatever. So his directive was learn how to communicate with each one of them. And I can give you an example of two officers that worked for me that I had some very direct but very different communications with. When I was communicating with them, again, this is all via email. It's very little personal communication unless they came into the office in the States. And
Mhm.
keep in mind, we're deployed overseas.
Yes.
So it's not very often. I had my boss, one thing I did in my emails is I always spent the first paragraph saying, how are you? How's the wife? Did the kids enjoy Christmas? Are you getting ready for your summer holiday? Blah, blah, blah. The personal touch.
Hmm.
My boss, I thought it was a good idea. My boss agreed. In any kind of communication, it's always a personal touch, reaching out, connecting with them personally. And then the rest of the stuff that I put in there. I had a lady who was in Asia. She was ethnic Chinese. She came into my office after she'd been working for me for about a year, and she said to me, please stop doing that. Please stop asking about how I'm doing personally because you don't care. I know you don't care. I don't
Oh.
care that you don't care. Let's stick to business. Don't make me spend time reading that. Okay. Again, you got to learn to communicate with each employee, with each staff
Hmm.
member. As a leader, I was there to serve her. And according to her, the best way for me to do that was
Hmm.
not to ask about her family because it just was a distraction to her.
Yeah.
Easy. I had
You-
another
you-
young gentleman. He was, I believe, ethnic Indian and deployed in Asia. Very, very, very good officer. Very good. And he came back to my office. Again, he'd been working for me about a year. Came into my office. Now, let me give you a term. The term's called case officering. It's actually a verb. What that really means is attempting to manipulate somebody to get an outcome that you want without really caring about what they're doing. Because that's what we
oh,
as case officers do. I'm going to manipulate someone to give me intelligence information. I'm going to use resources. I'm going to use money. I'm going to use my charm. I'm going to use my baby blue eyes, whatever it takes. That's the idea of case officering. Okay. That's the verb, definition of that verb. So let's go back to this gentleman that came into my office. We were talking, and about 10 minutes into the conversation, I leaned in to him with my finger and said, you stop case officering me. There were a few other words added in there, which you may imagine. His jaw hit the floor. After about 10 seconds, a very uncomfortable pause for him. Not for me. I was sitting waiting. Picked his jaw back up, and we got back to talking. And we talked like two adults talking to each other, not
mhm.
like one guy trying to manipulate somebody.
Man, there's so much goodness in there. Interpersonal communication can make or break any mission, any, hopes of a goal or any initiative, anything that you want to accomplish. And I love that you're bringing that all in. It doesn't really matter. I think it doesn't matter what type of personality test you take. They're all going to generally fall into, more of the aggressive, more of the, cheerleader, the structured systems and support person, the rule follower. So there's going to be patterns, and that's what it is. Nobody is really just one thing all the time. We can flex and move, but there are typical patterns. And as a leader, we sometimes get in a rut of habit of how we communicate, of how we want to receive communication. And so if I'm a dominant type A personality and I'm just hitting you with the facts, I'm probably going to offend the people who like the personal touch, that like the let me feel safe before before we step into the waters of all of this, hardcore work stuff. And so it's so important. And I love the examples that you gave because you're showcasing that, but you also made it safe to where, the lady could come and say, quit asking about my personal family. She sounded like, I don't want to, paint with a broad brush. She sounded like a more type A dominant, like, let's just get focused on the facts here, the tasks.
Most
And
case
then,
officers are.
yeah, absolutely. And so it's so important. And I love that you started off with, everything that you said about the first leader, he noticed you. Whenever you're traveling and you're traveling, internationally, and there's so many things that can go wrong, it appeared to you that number one, he cared for you and spent time going through the very long system of communication in order to communicate with you. I'm glad you're safe. I see you, I recognize you, I notice you, and I care for your well-being. There's number one. But then number two, the first time you step into management, you're talking about the first lesson that you got was how to communicate with different types of people. And I just applaud you in that. That's so, so good. So now let's go into, okay, we got a lot of things happening. We know that this in leadership, we can also oftentimes feel like a firefighter. I'm just in a revolving door of just putting out this fire, put out this fire, put out this fire, put out this fire. And that can really make for a lot of stressful environments. But some people have very high stakes situations that are happening where they have to make decisions even when the environment is unpredictable. Whether you're in finance, whether you're in education or healthcare, there can be a lot of high stress. So how does someone step into a very high pressured situation, high stakes situation, and how can we train our brain to stay clear and focused and to think critically when everything around us feels unstable?
Well, the experience is going to be my first answer. You have to be in situations where you recognize the importance of stepping back and taking a deep breath. And that's would be the first thing. You have to train your brain to be somewhat analytical. With many industries, including the one I served in, as an operations officer, you have to be able to operate with 80% or less of information, which means
Wow.
that at any given time, there's 20% unknown out there. You're not quite rolling the dice. You have experience um, and practice, so you can kind of guess at the other 20%, but you're not sure. Let me give you an example going back to my career. They train us how to detect surveillance because, as I'm sure you've seen in the news, the FBI puts surveillance on bad guys in this country. That's the first thing that they do when they're building a case. That's what law enforcement does. They survey them sometimes personally, sometimes electronically, doesn't matter. So I was doing surveillance detection runs. However, there's no such thing as a perfect surveillance detection run. I can assure you that the FBI doesn't want to know that they're following you. You're not going to know it. So, at any rate, it goes back to my first line of defense was always doing a surveillance detection run, where I'm either using a car to look for a car or I'm walking looking for a person. And at the end of the typical run, you have to make a decision. Did I see something that caused me concern? Did I
Mm-hmm.
see surveillance? Or do I think I don't have it? And I was blessed that thought I never had it. No one's ever countered me with, yeah, they did. No, to the best of my knowledge, I never had it. But at the time, you come to the end of the run and then you have a decision to make. Do you turn right and go with your operational activity, or do you turn left and go home?
Mm-hmm.
It's not 100%. So there are lots of people in this world. Again, I go back to the high quality folks we got as operations officers in the agency. They make decisions with 80% or less information. And that's a challenge. Leaders have to be able to do that. Where's the other 20% going to come from? It's going to come a little bit from experience, a little bit from guesswork, and not a little bit from luck. But luck is what you make of it, right? I mean, you make your own luck by planning, preparation. There's all kinds of trite phrases out there we could talk about. So the first thing you have to do is you have to be able to make decisions with less than complete information. There's lots of high stress industries out there. Finance industry is a perfect example, especially in these days. And I don't want to go political, but Donald Trump is being disruptive. I think we can all agree with that. Whether it's good or bad is where the discussion occurs.
Yeah.
But I think most people would agree he's being disruptive. So how do you deal with that? We have to. We don't have a choice. He's enforcing the new rules, such as they may be, on the world, essentially. So how do I, as a businessman, deal with that? I don't know what he's going to do next. I don't know what's the guy's name from Doge? His name escaped. Elon, what's his name? Um,
Elon Musk, yeah.
Elon Musk. Thank you. I don't know what his next thing's going to be. So who knows what's going to happen next? But as a leader, I still have to be able to make a decision. I can't
Mhm.
stop making a decision. I have to make a decision with 80% information. Now, one other thing that you have to do, and this is where I'll go back to another example from in the organization that I was in. You have to empower your people to fail. Failure.
Oh, I need you to explain that one because
Failure.
leaders don't like failing.
Failure. That's a
Like
that's
to
a
achieve.
four-letter word that we weren't going to use on this show. No, failure. No. Okay. What is that? Let me give you an example. First of all, if you're not failing once in a while, you're not really trying hard enough. Let's face
Oh.
it. I mean that quite seriously. The runners that are really, really running fast, what happens when they start running too fast? They lean over, they fall on their face. It's the same with any industry. So, what do I mean by the power to fail? I was head of the group that was monitoring the movement of weapons of mass destruction. And one of the analysts came to me, and I'd known this lady for, I don't know, a year and a half. I'd worked with her. She was a very competent analyst. We had a very good working relationship. And she came to me and said, I've just been tracking some WMD related material that came out of Asia, and it looks like it's going to the Middle East. I think it's already en route, so I don't think there's anything we can do about it. My very polite response was, we swing at every pitch.
Mm.
Get the emails out now. If you have trouble getting the emails out, you come to me because email traffic leaving the building goes through a variety of approvers. There's a variety of steps. And
Yeah.
sometimes it can get bogged down. But if that was going to happen, I want her to come to me because of my rank. I could go over and knock on somebody's door and say, what are you doing? We got to get this out. Stop. And it would get out. She didn't need any of that. So she said, okay, chief, and off she went. Next morning, she came into my office and said, we got it. We got it in, I think, KL, something like that, Kuala Lumpur. And we turned it around and we sent it back with a little love note that said, please don't do this anymore. I had empowered her to fail.
Mm.
What if she'd come in the next morning and said, we missed it?
Yeah.
Okay, we missed it. We still swing at every pitch. If you swing at every pitch, you're going to have strikes. That's just the nature of the beast. But if you don't swing at every pitch, are you going to miss a home run? Didn't
Mm.
Babe Ruth have the most number of strikeouts, I think, along with the most number of home runs? I think something to that effect. So we can't let failure stop us, or we can't let fear of failure stop us.
Mhm.
I'm not advocating failing every time. If you're failing every time, then perhaps you need to readjust.
Yeah.
But if you're
You
not
don't need
failing,
to be in the big leagues then of
yeah.
leadership.
But if you're not failing once in a while, then you're really
Mhm.
not pushing yourself hard enough.
Yeah.
You're not pushing your team hard enough. Again, leaders don't like to have that discussion. How many products have come out that have failed? So we have to empower failure. Only when we can let people take the risks, and they have to be measured risks. I'm not talking about stupid risks,
Mhm.
but we have to empower people to take risks. We have to empower people to overrun their own feet and fall on their face, because that's the only way they'll be able to find out how fast can they run. And that's how we empower our people to succeed, because we're empowering them to fail.
Mhm. Thinking about all the things, we're talking about high stakes environments, right? You're dealing with weapons of mass destruction. I can't even think about the consequences of if, something should happen. Like that's high stress in my book compared to, what we may be dealing with in our other leadership jobs. But the first thing you started with is taking a breath and trying to operate out of the logical side of your brain. And so often we can see things and take them as personal attacks, or I'm operating out of fear of looking like I don't know what I'm doing, fear of, somebody's going to call me out and say, you shouldn't, that imposter syndrome, you don't have the skill set, you shouldn't be in this role. And so we tend to operate out of emotion instead of the logical side of our brain. And a lot of that is just taking that breath and capturing our thoughts so that we go logical, not emotional. I love that you started out with that. And then you talked about experience, but I want to lean into that for example, a lot of people that are stepping into leadership don't have the experience yet. So how do you lead in high stakes we know that leadership experience will teach you're going to get a few scars, you're going to have a limp already, and you're like, oh, I've kind of been through a situation like this. I kind of know how to, navigate through it. But new leaders that are experiencing something for the first time, we've just said, take a breath, try to go logical, not emotional. But how else do they step into that whenever they feel like, I'm not ready for this? How do they, if they're feeling ill equipped, how do they prepare for those high stakes moments?
So, a couple things. The imposter syndrome. I used to walk around the headquarters building going, what am I doing here? Why? What? How come I'm here? I'm a little boy from a farm, small farm in Ohio. Anyway, I can appreciate that. Um, uh, the other thing that you mentioned was decision making and in a high stress environment and leaders. So I believe that everybody experiences leadership. A new person in a new role is simply experiencing the other side of the table.
Mm.
If you are an employee, you have a manager. So you have experienced leadership from someone giving you guidance, leadership, whatever term you want to use, bossing you around, being a bully, whatever, whatever. You've experienced it from that side of the table. Now you're on the other side of the table. And what you have to do is remember your experiences from when you were on the other side of the table. And I'm gonna call back to another example. When I took over a very large office in Northern Virginia, I probably had 30 people in that office, all working for me. My very first staff meeting, we had a big conference room, big conference table. Went into the conference room, had everybody stand up, move all the chairs to that side of the room, take the table, move it to that side of the room, and then put all the chairs in a circle so that there was nothing in between us. And I said to them, this is how we communicate in this meeting, in these staff meetings. There is nothing in between us. We are
Oh,
all
that's so
equal
good.
in these meetings. Espionage has been around since Joshua, I bet you're familiar with this guy, sent the two spies, Phineas and Caleb, into
Mm-hmm.
Jericho. That was 3,500 years ago. Rahab, the harlot, was the one who protected them. I sometimes make the joke that spies and prostitutes have been working together since the beginning of time. There's a little truth to that because we play on the same weakness that most men have, and that's their ego, at any rate.
Mm-hmm.
So, in 3,500 years, surely everything's been tried. Well, probably. And countries all around the world do it. Some do it well, some do it nasty, nasty, nasty bad. The CIA does it well. We do it as far as you can be a moral spy. We do it morally. We are doing it on I don't ever say I worked for the US government. I worked for the American people. That's who I
Mm-hmm.
was serving. So that's why when you're in a meeting like that, I wanted to make the point that the newest person to this profession has the same right to speak up as I do. They might have the idea that solves the problem. Would they be afraid to speak if there was some barrier in between us? Maybe, I don't know. But I was making sure to remove as many physical barriers, at least, as I could, so that everybody understood, yeah, we're all sitting in this room, we're all sitting knee to knee, everybody's uncomfortable, good, I like that. We're all equally uncomfortable because we thought, well, where's the table? But we don't have one. We're connected, we're communicating on an equal level. And that's something that's hard for leaders to do, but they have to be able to do it also.
Mm-hmm.
I was blessed with, as I said, more than one very good leader who I could go talk to and say, and this is the way it is. I had more than one leader that wagged his finger at me. Okay, I learned how to deal with them too. Um, but you have to be able to talk as equals in a leadership role. That's what a leader does. He talks as equals. And I've mentioned earlier, servant leadership. It's not about making the boss look good or me as the boss making me look good. Servant leadership is all about serving the people that work for you. And Yes, I have additional responsibilities, consequences for bad decisions, et cetera, et cetera. But without my team, what do I have?
Yeah.
So it's my job to serve them. It's my job to make them look good. It was my job as a leader to protect my officers and to get them promoted.
I want to go back full circle there because I loved what you said about spies and harlots have been working together forever. You know, and the weakness that they really pinpoint to get information as spies is man's ego or woman's ego. It's ego. And, now you're saying in leadership, 2 points that I just heard you made, and I just love them so much. Is first, don't try not to dive too far into that imposter syndrome pitfall because you have experience. You have seen leadership. You have seen leaders, good and bad, and you can learn from those experiences. Just reflect on it. What is it that you needed as the employee? And now you can turn around and give it whenever you are the leader to your employees. So that's so good. But then the second one in servant leadership is you got to die to ego. That is what spies are tapping into to gather information. And so, knowing that that can be a huge pitfall, a huge weakness in our leadership style, we have to surrender that ego so that you can serve others. And your visual, whenever you brought your team into that office of 30 plus people and removing the table and say there's no barriers between us and how we communicate, the fact of how you made that such a safe place and you died to ego of saying we have equal communication, we share everything. You really established that safety so communication could flow. And I just applaud you for that. There's so much goodness in your stories. I knew there would be with all the experience that you've had, and it's amazing. So taking all of the things that you've shared with us, you've operated in some morally complex environments. Let me summarize it that way.
Yes, ma'am.
And I've heard that you love a quote by Dietrich Bonhoeffer. I have seen the movie. I'm currently reading his book, Cost of Discipleship. But his quote is silence in the face of evil is itself evil. God will not hold us guiltless. Not to speak is to speak. Not to act is to act. And that's a quote by Dietrich Bonhoeffer. And for those of you that don't know him, I'll let you pitch up to just give a quick background to who he is. But talk about even when you're operating and leading in complex environments or morally complex environments, how important it is to speak up. So, first, can you give us a very quick background into who Dietrich Bonhoeffer is? And then, two, why this quote is so impactful for leaders?
Dietrich Bonhoeffer was a Lutheran pastor. He was German. He had the opportunity, and on several occasions, he took the opportunity to travel to the UK and the United States during World War II. He ultimately went back to Germany during World War II. He became involved in the plot to assassinate Hitler, and he was ultimately executed for that. That's what you call putting your money where your mouth is.
Yeah, he paid with his life.
Yes. And that's why that quote is so meaningful because it's true. I would challenge anybody to find a part of that quote that is not accurate.
Mm-hmm.
And if you are not going to defend what is right, then you're acquiescing to those who are opposed to it. We can throw up the politics right now, and there are lots of people that are protesting what Donald Trump is doing. They have every right to do that. And people who are not protesting are assumed to being in agreement with that. Okay, those are assumptions that we make. I'm not saying they're accurate, but those are assumptions that we make based on Dietrich Bonhoeffer's statement. So I found that statement so inspirational. I actually heard it on the Glenn Beck show a long time ago, like 20 years ago. And that's when I read, I think Glenn Beck wrote a book about Dietrich Bonhoeffer, if I remember correctly. But whatever the book was he recommended, I read it. And it's such a moving story. How many of us will put our money where our mouth is?
Mm.
How many of us will stand up for what we believe is right? And that's a hard question. It's hard to ask people to sacrifice because that is ultimately what happened to him. And can we make the same sacrifice? Are we willing to put up and do what it takes if we believe in something?
Yeah. In thinking about all that, number one, leaders speak up about things that matter, but it's not just words. They then take action in things that matter. And so we speak up about things that matter, and then you take action in things that matter. And then whenever, you ask the question, well, what matters? Only you can decide that for whatever situation that you're in, but whenever you're silent, whenever you see a wrong and you're silent, you are agreeing with that. I know Martin Luther King Jr. also has a ton of speeches and things that go to that same concept. And so in all of the high stakes environment situations that you can be in as a leader, I think that where all this comes to a head, and please, share your thoughts on this, is one, you have to act. And even if you fail through your action, like you established, then you're not trying hard enough. You're going to fail sometimes. And if you're never failing, you're not trying hard enough. I love that so much. And so when high stakes come, take a breath, calm down, operate logically, but definitely say something and do something. And even if you fail, it's okay. Knowing that you've done the right thing, you have served the people that are in your care. You've taken that stewardship and served them well by speaking up and taking action, is what matters. So, what are your thoughts on that? Just kind of bringing all of it to a head.
Everybody has a boss. Even the CEO of a company has a board of directors or stockholder, whatever, no matter how far up the food chain you may go, everybody has a boss. So you can not only serve your people, but you can also serve your boss. And guess what? Your boss is there to serve you. So
Mm-hmm.
when you find yourself in these high stakes situations, you take a breath, you use the 80% of knowledge that you have, you say, I'm going to do this. Let me check with my boss. Sometimes it's worth a phone call because a couple things will happen. One is if things are going to go south, bosses hate surprises. So they're going to know what you're doing, what your
True.
plan is, how you got there.
Mm-hmm.
Two, he may have a recommendation or a suggestion. He may say, have you thought about this or that? Most leaders are not going to argue with you if you believe, if you make your case, they're going to question it, they make recommendations. At the end of the day, if you're willing to take the risk, it's on you, knock yourself out. And then also that way, if it does go south and you say to your boss, we talked about this. This is I took your recommendations, we modified it XXXX, didn't go the way we had hoped.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, you did your job. You
Yeah.
took care of your people, you took care of your boss. And most bosses, not all, because we all work for not good bosses. Most bosses are going to go, darn, so sorry that went sideways. What's
Mm-hmm.
next? And they're going to move on
Yeah.
because you're in that position, not because you never failed. You're in that position because you are a leader and a winner and are driven to be successful. And that's what they want. Like I said, most bosses out there, like if you're not
Yeah.
slipping and falling once in a while, you're just not running fast enough.
Man, I love it. And it's so true. Bosses do not want to be surprised. And so often I think that, we want to hoard problems, hoard that information because we don't want to look bad. Again, that's more of the emotional side and ego. And you have to release that and say, hey, this could be a potential issue. Let me be very proactive in communicating them with this so they're not surprised in that. And I love what you're saying. Leadership isn't about avoiding failure. If you have a failure, it doesn't mean you're not a bad leader. I think the best leaders are the ones who know how to navigate all the obstacles. And it doesn't mean that you're able to bust through every obstacle, but you at least know how to navigate whatever comes in your way, whatever obstacle you're facing. And so for leaders listening right now, maybe they're navigating, a pressure cooker. I don't know. It's a really hard situation, whether it's in their organization, their school, their business, or even their family, right? Leadership and family too. What are some key takeaways for our listeners that they need to apply to grow them in leadership? Like, what are some of those key takeaways, some of those truths that you want them to walk away with based upon all the wisdom and experience you've shared?
We talked about ego, and ego is very important to what we do. When you go through the training at the CIA, they spend a great deal of time pounding your ego out of you. And then, you're laughing. I'm serious. And then they spend a great deal of time building your ego back up, but building it back up in the way that they want it.
Mm,
Because as you can imagine, as you have said, we're working in a high stress environment. So it takes a pretty strong ego to walk around a foreign capital and, do that espionage stuff. Um, so you have to have a strong ego, but you have to be able to check the ego.
mhm,
And you have to know when to check it and when to pull it out. So one of the biggest leadership skills, I would say, and I think a lot will flow from this, is knowing when to check your ego, when to be quiet and listen. You
oh,
could have an employee, a staff member, an analyst, whatever, that for reasons that have nothing to do with the leader, they're shy, they're afraid to come talk to you, or whatever their emotional trauma or stress is, they don't really feel comfortable talking to you. You have to make them feel comfortable talking to you. Best way to do that is to demonstrate your listening skills.
mm.
Notice in the American academic system, we have speech classes, but we don't have listening classes.
Oh, it's so true.
So listening is a learned skill.
Hmm.
So a leader needs to learn how to listen to each employee. Again, it goes back to what my boss first told me. Communicating with each employee it's going to be different. I have to learn how. So the most important thing in my piece of guidance would be learn how to communicate with each employee. If you're the CEO of a company, then you have executive vice presidents that work for you. Chances are you already have a long-standing relationship with them, or you wouldn't have been in the position you're in. Either way, they need to know that they can come into your office and you will listen to them. Don't
Hmm.
confuse listening with agreeing or even acquiescing. You're simply listening to this person's problem, idea, creation, family. You don't know what it is, but by being a good listener, and I am not going to sit here and tell you I was a good listener. I had to learn that skill, I can assure you. By being an interactive listener, you will improve the communication and understanding that you have of your staff and that they have of you. The agency is full of what we call reloaders. You know what a reloader is?
No.
A reloader is someone that's busy reloading their gun. They're not listening to you talk. They're reloading their gun so they can start firing back at you. And then, well, no, that's a reloader. That's not listening. So when you listen, don't be making the arguments from what they just said. When you listen, listen, and then
Hmm.
pause and think and then speak. And we are not inclined to do that as a culture.
It's so true. There's a quote I love, and it's by Andy Stanley. And he says, and I hope I get this right, leaders who don't listen will eventually be surrounded by people that have nothing to say. And that may not be an exact word quote, but that's at least the
It's
gist
close
of
enough.
it. Yeah. And it's so true. You have to be an active listener. And even if you don't have the skill set, you can, with anything, you can learn the skill, but we can be blind. I love to talk. My husband often says, land the plane, Bethany, And so for me, I've had to learn, and hopefully I'm still learning how to be an active listener, to engage other people in that conversation. Well, Jeffrey, you have given us such wonderful advice today, but now I want to flip it. I want to ask you, what is one poor decision you would warn our leaders to avoid? Like if you were to wag your finger, like, don't do this one thing. Come on, leaders, you're better than that. What would that one poor decision be?
Not respecting personal boundaries.
Mm, what do you mean by that?
Keep all the relationships at work and professional. Do
Mm,
not confuse them with the personal. That doesn't mean you can't go have a beer with a buddy once in a while.
yeah.
That's one thing, but be careful where that personal relationship goes.
And it makes sense. And even whenever you step over that line, now you're talking to your, I don't know, are you a friend? Are you a coworker? But you're also taking up their family time, probably still talking about work. I think to me, that's the first example that popped into my brain is,
Perfect.
yes, we are friends even outside the workplace, but guess what we're talking about outside the workplace? Work. And now we're taken away from, family time or what could be, friend time, growing each other, whatever. So that's a great example. All right, let's talk about your book, Humint for Humanity. It's filled with lessons in the shadows, but it's shared for the good world. Yes. And I will have an image on there and a link in the show notes so you can get it. So, one, tell us what Humint means, Humint for Humanity, and then where can we go get the book and learn more about you and your work and what you do?
Human stands for human intelligence. The NSA, which we've all heard of, collects SIGINT, which is signals intelligence. There's something called OSINT, which stands for open source intelligence, which is a good excuse for the analyst to read the newspaper. Humint is human intelligence. It comes from human sources.
Mm.
And that's what the CIA predominantly does. We work with human sources to collect intelligence. I wrote the book to try and give my fellow citizens a view of life outside of this country. Most Americans stop at the big blue border we have on our East Coast and West Coast. Canada doesn't really count because they're way too much like us. Not exactly like us, but very similar to us. So most Americans don't have a good view that is not formed by either bad TV movies or inappropriate news articles. So what I did was I tried to take my experience, where I traveled to, the people that I dealt with, and bring that personal experience to the reader.
All right, so Humint for Humanity, that's human intelligence for humanity. Love it. Where can the listeners go get the book and connect with you after today's episode?
They can get the book at Amazon and connect with me through Amazon, or they can get it at Barnes and Nobles and go online or at both stores.
Perfect. Well, Jeffrey, thank you so much for being on today's podcast and just sharing all of your experience in the CIA and just all of your wisdom. It was fascinating. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for the opportunity. It's been a very great pleasure.
All right. Guys, until next time, continue putting in the work of building your life and leadership on the rocks, the essential rocks. God bless. Remember, the most essential rock you can build your life and leadership on is the rock of Jesus Christ. Today's Bible verse comes from Philippians chapter 4, verses 6 and 7. Do not be anxious about anything, but in everything by prayer and supplication, with thanksgiving, let your requests be made known to God. And the peace of God, which surpasses all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus.